I'm back. For our first panel, I'm thrilled to introduce two creators of landmark shows who have been contributing to TV since the earliest days. Norman Lear has been creating work for television since the 50s, when one of his first credits was Ford Star Theater in 1951. Before he worked in TV, he flew 52 combat missions with a bombing squadron in World War II. How smart was he to get all his bombing out of the way before he started creating TV? In the 70s, you couldn't turn on primetime TV without running into one of his shows. Each one begat the next, like the TV version of Cell Division. He's recognized on our list for All in the Family, which spawned The Jeffersons, Good Times, Maude, Fernwood Tonight, Mary Hartman, and more. Welcome, please, Norman Lear.
Where would you like me?
Good to see you.
Where would you like me?
Carl Reiner almost needs no introduction, though I think if I don't give him one, it might piss him off. He was an actor on your show of shows and an actor-writer on the Sid Caesar Hour. In fact, he was the original constantly morphing hyphenate. He has 9 Primetime Emmys, a Writers Guild Laurel Award, and the Valentine Davies Award. In 1961, he created The Dick Van Dyke Show, a sitcom about a TV variety show called The Alan Brady Show that was so forward-thinking, 1/3 of the staff writers were women. And by the way, for a variety show, that's a record that's still never been equaled. 50 years later, it's earned him a well-deserved place on our list. Please welcome Carl Reiner.
Primetime Emmys.
12? Apparently, I shorted Carl 3 Emmys. He's gotten 12 Primetime Emmys.
Can I pay you back with a mother story for that great mother story you
I would
told?
love it.
I got a call from John Mitchell, who was at the time the first president of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, Sunday morning. Norman, I got to tell you a secret. We've just decided we're going to do a Hall of Fame. The first honorees in the Hall of Fame are going to be William Paley, General Sarnoff, Edgar Murrow, Patty Chayefsky, Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and you. I call my mother in Bridgeport immediately. It's like 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And I tell her, this is what's happening. And I list out all those names, and she said, listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I to say?
You know, if there weren't these women, there would be no comedy.
There would be no boys.
Let's talk about the earliest days of TV. You guys were there at the inception of it, when it was brand new. Did the earliest days of TV encourage experimentation, or were there the same amount of restrictions as every other point along the way in TV?
The earliest days of TV for me was 1948. There was a show called The Fashion Story. It was held in the writers. It was a writers' rink, a horse rink, down on ABC, where ABC is now today. There was a horse rink. They took one room and made it a studio for news. And from that studio, I did a show called The Fashion Story. I was a comedy photographer. I sang with a girl named Doris Day, Marilyn Day, not Doris Day. Doris Day was many years later.
You were singing on Fashion Story?
Fashion Story. It was a terrible, terrible,
Do you
terrible.
remember anything you're saying?
No, it was a terrible, 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 terrible show.
Well, it might be time to pitch it again.
And I got $80 a week for it. I was in a show called Inside USA with B. Lilly and Jack Haley, and I got in a cab and made it from the studio at ABC right onto stage at 8 o'clock, but I got $150 and $80, $230 for that. Yes.
Did you create those shows, Fashion Story? And
No. Somebody else created it. No, I didn't get into creating business until years later.
Well, how were shows, when you would go to pitch a show in the early 50s, what did they have to use for restrictions? I mean, were they encouraging, like, would you have to pitch at a network, and were they encouraging experimentation?
No, I didn't. You know, the only show I ever pitched was a show that became the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I'll do a fast genesis because it's interesting to me. Right after the show of shows was over, I did Caesar's Hour, 9 years with Sid, and that form was dead now until Carl Burnett came back and resurrected, and Saturday Night Live. There was nothing for me to do, and I was being offered situation comedies written by writers who could not write, not like anybody here. And I read them, and my wife in her infinite wisdom said, why don't you write one? I said, I don't have, and this is, by the way, I recommend this highly. If you're a fairly intelligent person, I talk to myself out loud. And I remember this is the exact genesis of the Dick Van Dyke Show. I was at the 96th Street ramp going to, in New York. And I said to myself, Reiner, I never call myself my first name. I said, Reiner, what piece of ground do you stand on that nobody else stands on? I said, well, I live in New Rochelle with my wife and kids. I work in New York in a variety review show. And when I go to work, I talk about my family. When I go home, I talk about what's going on at the office with the three writers. And I said, I'll write about that. I wrote a show called Head of the Family, and the pilot was done. Peter Lawford put up money for the pilot, and I said, if I'm going to write, if I'm going to have this show, I better have a Bible for other writers if it takes off. So that summer I wrote 13 episodes of the Dick Van Dyke Show, which became the Dick.
You were going to star in the original show, correct?
I did star in it. It was called Head of the Family. Barbara Britton, Morty Gunty, and Sylvia Miles were the other characters. I did it. It was fair. It was the horses and guns. And I put it aside. I started doing movies at Universal. I did a movie for Doris Day, Thrill of It All. And then somebody gave these 13 scripts to my agent. He had it lying on his desk, and nothing bothers an agent more than having gold lying there and not being able to. And he called me in. He gave it to Sheldon Leonard to read, and Sheldon was working with Danny Thomas. I called Tandem. And he said, not Tandem, your Tandem. Yes. Anyway, they had a T&L Productions, T&L. Nope. And he said, these are very good examples of good writing. And he said, and I said, Sheldon, no. I said, I failed with it once. I don't want to fail with the same material twice. And he said, and this is a fairly good impression, you won't fail, Carl, because we'll get a better actor to play you. He suggested Dick Van Dyke, and the rest is history.
Norman, I read in your credits that you started out writing a Western with Henry Fonda.
First thing I did was, in your introduction, was the Ford Star Review starring Jack Haley.
Right.
Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, several weeks after our first show, were going on the air, and they saw a sketch we did. Jerry saw a sketch we did that he loved. It happened to be MCA was handling both shows, and I want those guys. So 2 weeks, 3, 4 weeks after writing Jack Haley, we moved over to Martin and Lewis, and we came on strong when they came on strong. That was the first.
So you wrote for Martin and Lewis.
I wrote for Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis. And the sketch that caught a lot of attention on Jack Haley, we would never in a million, and this fascinates me, never in a million years do today. It was called Blind Date. And Dean brought Jerry to a door where he was picking up a girl to take her on a date. And he said, Jerry was wearing thick glasses. He said, take off the glasses. You'll make a better impression. And he walked in this way. On the other side of the door, a sister going out the back way was saying to her sister, who was being left with the guy who had just run, take off the glasses. So Jerry walks in, and two people who can't find each other in the room, one of them being Jerry Lewis. We'd never do it in a million years.
How did you wind up writing Westerns? Was that difficult to keep jokes, or did you put jokes in Westerns?
I was, Bud Yorkin, with whom I became partners later, was producing the Jenny C. Rooney Ford show. And he invited me to, I was working with Ed Simmons. Oh God, this is an interesting story. Personal, but interesting. Anyway, they offered us $1,500 or something for the team. We had just been making a lot of money writing for Martha Ray, did that too, for several years, the Martha Ray show. And Eddie couldn't handle taking that little money. I needed it desperately. I took the job. The head writer was Roland Kibbe, who was a great writer. He had the idea of doing something called The Deputy with Henry Fonda. We became good friends. We worked together and learned more from Roland Kibbe than anybody else. And we did The Deputy together. And
No jokes. You didn't find yourself putting jokes into it?
We did 26 episodes. It was into syndication forever. We have a piece of it. We never got a nickel.
Fantastic.
Not a nickel.
Well, both of you wrote for big personalities and on a variety show level. What was that like? What were those writers' rooms like?
By the way, I'd like to tip on my hat to the writers on the Show of Shows. I consider the college I went to, I was an actor, I was also a comedian in the Army. I wrote my own material, but I didn't think of myself as a comedy writer. But there was a guy named Mel Tolkien, Lucille Callan, Mel Brooks, who was working for Sid for $45 a week. He wasn't on the staff. And Tony Webster, Neil Simon, Doc Simon, those guys, sitting in a room with those guys was my college. I said, wow, that's how it's done. As a matter of fact, one story I love to tell is that Neil Simon always had brilliant ideas, but he had the voice of a turtle. He used to sit next to me, and people were throwing out jokes, and I would raise my hand. I said, hold it, hold it, hold it. And this was my line, Neil's got it. And I would say what Neil had just said. And for the rest of the time he's there, he always managed to sit next to me and whisper to me. He didn't whisper, he said it out loud, but nobody heard it. But I considered that my college. I really learned about what writing was, listening to those guys.
I saw Carl Reiner. As the war ended, there was a huge musical success called Call Me Mister, Harold Rome, music and lyrics. And if I could do any one thing before I pass on, it would be to be the central guy in a three number. And he sang a three number that was so unforgettable. And it's an interesting American phenomenon that nobody can find the lyrics to this song. Because the song was, let's do it. Nothing is too good for the man who fought for the honor of the USA. Nothing is too good for the man who braved, for the man who saved the day.
And the lyric that was...
Here's where the lyric went. The song was three senators. There was a Bilbo, a Rankin. I can't remember the other redneck.
And we were prancing up and down on the footlights. Buddy Hackett was one of them, and singing this song. One of the songs.
George Irving was the other one.
No, not.
I've been in touch with him.
No, not George.
Another company.
Another company, not George Irving. Anyway, so the lyric that was missing. Nothing could be as good to a man. as long as
he doesn't believe in that Yom Kippur, belly who.
As long as he
Nothing.
doesn't believe in that Yom Kippur ballyhoo, nothing is too good for the man who fought for the honor of the USA. A little anti-Semitism there. and when they recorded it, when they put the sheet music out, that song does not exist.
You can buy the album Call Me Mister, and that song, which was so racist and anti-Semitic.
It's what made the show.
But you know,
I mean, it was putting it down, and it was.
it was safe though because there are no Jews in show business for the most part.
There certainly weren't then.
But that was next to closing. That was the show that picked the show up and said, this is something special. Next to closing, right at the end of the show, that was the Senator song, and it was expunged.
It was explosive.
So you wrote for Martha Ray. She had a, was that a variety
I wrote
show
and
like the
directed
Caesar show?
and- Yeah. Following, I think that one of the best, if not the best comedy writer, Nat Hiken, who wrote Bilko.
Bilko.
Yeah.
How did that work in terms of the writer's room, working for Martha Ray?
It was just Ed Simmons and me.
So whatever you wanted.
Just two of us. And I was directing, so
Did you find yourself at that time doing what you ended up becoming famous for, which is pushing politics and so forth into the content, or was that taboo at that point?
it's interesting. It was because I'm working on a memoir. I've only just gone back and found things. The very first Martin and Lewis show, we did a sketch. Motion Pictures was afraid of television, so there was a big campaign. You remember, movies are better than ever. And the joke of our sketch was it was hard to get people into a movie theater. So Dean was standing out in front of a movie theater. Marilyn Maxwell was working with him, sexually trying to get guys to come into the theater. Dean couldn't get anything. Jerry comes along, poor schlub, and he's trying to get Jerry into the theater. And finally Jerry, anyway, the sketch was hilarious because Jerry was hilarious. But what followed from that was an enormous political reality. The Motion Picture Association damned the show. The network took it off the air, didn't run it in some places. And it was a big sting, and we were political, though we hadn't.
What did they,
I think
why?
that's because we were putting down the motion picture business and the exhibition business. So anyway, an awful lot of it comes just out of instinct.
That's amazing. Carl, how much of Sid Caesar was there in Alan Brady?
Sid Caesar was not in Alan Brady.
No?
No, everybody thought that I invented that. Alan Brady was invented because you need a protagonist. Your writers need somebody to fight against. Sid Caesar was a pussycat. For 9 years, we went to lunch every day, had dinner maybe 4 or 5 times a week. He was a pussycat. When I had to write Alan Brady, figure out who Alan Brady was, he was a combination of Jackie Gleason, who never spoke to his writers. You know, the writers would write the show and shove the material under the door of his hotel room. He never saw the writers. Milton Berle, who yelled at the writers and blew whistles at them. And and the third one was a guy named Phil Silvers, who did a show called Top Banana, where he played an amalgam
And
of
Bilko.
those two guys. So this is the guy who Alan Brady became. And who better to play a schmuck but me?
You know, every now and again you will run into a stand-up comedian who's just a little bit ornery. It doesn't happen much, but every now and again. Okay. This is another question for Carl. How do you think that your show would have been different if you had played the part instead of Dick Van Dyke? How would the scripts have
It would
been
have gone
different?
down the tube immediately. No, I was okay. Dick is one of the most gifted actors that ever lived. He can do anything. As a matter of fact, one day I asked him to do two things at once, and he did them. I went to him, I gave him a problem. I said, Dick, he's really a guy who's so kinesthetic. Every part of him works together. I said, I want you to sneeze, fart, burp, get an itch in your ear, something in your eye, and fart. I wanted all in one, and he did it. He actually did it.
I'll never forget the guy who mic'd that fart.
What shows from that period inspire both of you guys now when you look back on them?
Jackie Gleason, for sure. It was the show of shows. What Imogene Coca, what Carl and Sid did together. My God. I mean,
Well, Sid, I said this before, Sid was the greatest sketch comedian in the history of sketch comedians. By the way, he's not well now, but I'd like to say why I know that Sid was the best of all. You know, people go to school, Stanislavski method. Sid never, he was a musician, he was a saxophonist, but he was the greatest sense memoryist. Sense memory is something that we try to teach in Stanislavski, and I saw this happen. It was an unbelievable thing. We were doing, we're looking for a pantomime for Sid. Sid did wonderful pantomimes. We said, oh, Sid, you're in a house and you're having trouble opening a bottle of water or a jar of olives. So he took an imaginary jar of olives and he started to struggle, and nothing was funny enough. We said, that was in my head, don't you worry. I don't want anybody to worry. It happens all the time. Whoa. Anyway, so we said, it doesn't work, Sid. And then the next thing you know, we're all laughing. And Sid said, what are you all laughing at? We said, Sid, do you know what you did? This talk about sense memory. He said, I didn't do anything. What did I do? When we said to Sid that the little pantomime wouldn't work, he had done this, and he had it open. And when we said, it's not going to work, he started to think, and he closed it and put it down. Literally, and he did not, we're all looking at him, he did not know he did that. And the other piece of sense memory that I'll never forget is that, you know how when you tell an actor you're smoking a cigarette and you don't have a cigarette, you know how they put a cigarette in their mouth like this? Sid always had room for the cigarette in his hand, and there's room here. He had a sense memory. It was, I want you to know that when we say Sid was a genius, he was.
I tell you a Sid Caesar story that took place right here in those chairs on this stage. It was Larry Gelbart's memorial. And I was speaking, Mel was speaking, Carl was speaking, Sid was speaking. And I had spoken, Carl had spoken, and Sid, I guess, might have been the last one to be called on. And he was really ailing. And we got up and spoke from the stage, and he stood up in that end chair. And he, like maybe 20 seconds of that, and I leaned over and I said, Italian. And he went, but how about skip them? You do it. You know. And then Japanese. He did Japanese, and he did the whole thing, setting and brought the house down.
Hey, by the way, you mentioned one name, Larry Gelbart. He was, when I was talking about people in the writer's room, Larry Gelbart, without a doubt, was the single most brilliant wit ever lived in our business. He didn't need more than a syllable as a straight line, one line, and we never saw a mind like that. We'll never see one again, and we won't see him again because he's dead.
And we will see him again.
I am 91 years old, and I'm on a path to see him.
Well, you know, we could talk about classic TV all night, and for a minute there I thought we were going to. But But really, we don't want to annoy the younger writers who are checking their Facebook pages. So let's continue with the countdown of the 101 best written TV series, picking it up at number 78.